Miami, January 26, 2000.
Before dawn breaks, a dozen FBI agents surround a quiet suburban house. The only sound is the hum of computers inside and the faint tapping of keys. A teenager sits in front of an old CRT monitor, lines of code reflecting off his glasses. The cursor blinks like a heartbeat. Then, a knock. Another. A third. Harder. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Open the door. Downstairs, his parents shout his name. The door splinters, flashlights cut through the darkness. The agents rush in, shouting commands. The boy freezes, hands raised, terrified. They shove him to the floor, the keyboard clattering beside him. On his screen, the words, "Welcome to NASA," flicker one last time before the power is cut. Jonathan James was only 15. The FBI would call him a national security threat. NASA would lose 3 weeks of operations, and America would realize the new battlefield was no longer on Earth. But how did a high school student from Florida bring the world's most powerful institutions to their knees? How did it all lead to this? Jonathan Joseph James was born on the 12th of December 1983, in South Florida, a place where the humid air carried the buzz of suburban routine. His parents described him as quiet, intelligent, and deeply curious. While other kids played outside, Jonathan preferred to take things apart: old radios, calculators, computer boards scavenged from garage sales. He didn't just want to use technology. He wanted to understand how it worked. By the mid-1990s, computers were becoming personal, and the internet was still an untamed frontier. For teenagers like Jonathan, it wasn't just a tool, it was freedom. Dial-up modems, IRC chat rooms, and underground forums were the new playgrounds. He began teaching himself programming languages like C and Unix commands from library books and online text dumps. It didn't take long before curiosity turned into capability. At 13, he joined a small group of amateur hackers who traded exploits and scripts. They called themselves C0 Marade, a name he adopted as his online alias. It wasn't about money or fame, it was about access. For Jonathan, hacking was a game of intellect. Each system was a puzzle, each firewall a challenge to outsmart. But in the late 1990s, the digital world was changing fast. Governments, corporations, and military agencies were moving critical data online, often without fully understanding the risks. The same networks that powered NASA's missions or the Pentagon's communications were connected, in some way, to the open internet. Jonathan began exploring high-level domains out of pure curiosity. Through simple vulnerabilities, unsecured passwords, weak network permissions, he slipped into systems he was never meant to see. In one instance, he discovered a Department of Defense server used for monitoring environmental and biological threats. Instead of backing away, he looked deeper, driven by the thrill of discovery. He didn't know it yet, but his actions were already triggering alarms across federal cybersecurity teams. Hidden deep within the logs of defense networks, an unidentified intruder later traced back to his small Florida home had just accessed a part of the U.S. government's secure infrastructure. Then came NASA. In late 1999, Jonathan found a backdoor into one of NASA's systems used by engineers for the International Space Station. Once inside, he downloaded proprietary source code, the kind used to control the station's life support and physical environment systems. Over the following days, he intercepted over 3,000 confidential messages between NASA scientists. He wasn't selling data. He wasn't destroying files. He was watching and learning. To him, it was an experiment. To the U.S. government, it was a full-scale breach of national security. And soon, the name C0 Marade would become the most hunted handle on the internet. The first sign of intrusion appeared inside NASA's network logs. Engineers at the Marshall Space Flight Center noticed unexplained data transfers packets moving between systems that should never have been linked. A digital fingerprint, small but deliberate. Someone was copying files from servers containing the International Space Station's core source code. The breach triggered a full-scale federal response. The Department of Defense, NASA's Office of Inspector General, and the FBI's Miami field office joined forces. At first, they believed the hacker must be a trained foreign operative, perhaps from Russia or China. The level of access was too deep, the understanding too precise. investigators began tracing the connections. Each intrusion came from a small IP range in Florida. Late at night, between 1 and 4 a.m., someone was dialing in, routing through open proxies, and disappearing again. The digital footprints were meticulous but not perfect. Jonathan's modem would sometimes disconnect and reconnect, creating timestamp overlaps that narrowed the search window. FBI agents began comparing the suspect's online handle, C0MeRaid, with known IRC logs and hacking forum chatter. They found traces of conversations, a young voice boasting about NASA's bad firewall, and how you could literally walk into their systems. Still, in 1999, digital forensics was primitive. Tracing an IP meant long nights of paperwork and manual verification. Meanwhile, NASA engineers were forced to take 13 computers offline, halting operations linked to the International Space Station. The estimated downtime cost exceeded $41,000 in labor and restoration alone. NASA called it one of the most serious intrusions in its history. When the Department of Defense confirmed that the same intruder had accessed a Defense Threat Reduction Agency server monitoring chemical and biological weapon data, the case escalated to a matter of national security. This wasn't just digital trespassing anymore. It was espionage territory. Agents quietly surveilled several suspects in the Miami area, focusing on households with early broadband connections. They contacted local ISPs, tracking login records that matched the intrusion timestamps. One address kept appearing: a residential home in Pinecrest, Florida. At 6 a.m. on January 26, 2000, a federal warrant was executed. Agents entered the James family home, seizing computers, floppy disks, and notebooks filled with hand-drawn network diagrams. On one monitor, the NASA interface was still visible, frozen mid-command. Jonathan didn't resist. He didn't run or argue. When questioned, he reportedly said, "I just wanted to see how far I could go." Inside his computer, investigators found fragments of the stolen NASA code, encrypted passwords from defense servers, and chat logs describing the hacks in detail. The evidence was overwhelming. The FBI's internal report later noted, "This level of intrusion, achieved by a minor, demonstrates the vulnerability of U.S. systems and the evolving nature of digital threats." But behind the headlines of the teen hacker who breached NASA, the case raised uncomfortable questions. How could a 15-year-old, with a dial-up modem and curiosity, outsmart billion-dollar systems? And what did that say about the future of cybersecurity and the fragility of trust in the digital age? By the spring of 2000, the case of United States v. Jonathan James had become a national spectacle. News anchors called him the boy who hacked the Pentagon. Reporters gathered outside the Miami courthouse, cameras aimed at the teenager whose curiosity had crossed into a federal crime. Jonathan arrived quietly, wearing a plain shirt, head down, surrounded by his parents and lawyers. He was a minor, just 15, but the magnitude of his intrusion put him in a legal gray area. Prosecutors debated whether to try him as an adult. The Department of Justice wanted to send a message: hacking, no matter how young the offender, would not go unpunished. In court, the prosecutors laid out the evidence with precision. They described how Jonathan accessed the Defense Threat Reduction Agency's network, downloading software that could simulate biochemical attacks, information reserved for high-level defense personnel. They projected screenshots of NASA's control systems, the same ones he had viewed from his bedroom computer. The courtroom lights dimmed as jurors watched the lines of stolen code scroll across the screen, a stark visualization of digital trespass. The lead prosecutor summarized it bluntly. This young man didn't just break into computers. He broke into the defense infrastructure of the United States government. Jonathan's defense attorney countered that argument with equal conviction. He portrayed Jonathan as a brilliant but naive teenager, a self-taught prodigy who lacked any malicious intent. He didn't sell secrets. He didn't damage systems. He explored, the lawyer said. This was curiosity, not espionage. The room was tense. Even the judge seemed torn. In 2000, the world still struggled to define digital crimes, especially when committed by children born into the internet age. The FBI's agents, the NASA engineers, and the public all agreed the breach was serious, but no one could decide how to punish curiosity that had simply gone too far. After weeks of negotiation, The court reached a decision that balanced justice with leniency. Jonathan James would not be tried as an adult. Instead, he was convicted under the federal juvenile system, making him the first minor ever sentenced for cybercrime in the United States. His punishment: 6 months of house arrest, 1 probationary period, and a lifetime computer ban, unless for educational purposes and under supervision. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Jonathan nodded, expression blank. His parents wept quietly beside him. The judge looked down at the boy and said, "You are a symbol of our times of intelligence and recklessness combined. I hope you choose which one will define your future." Reporters flooded the courthouse steps as the news spread. "Teen hacker brings NASA to its knees," read one headline. Another called him the boy who could break America. For a brief moment, Jonathan James became an unwilling icon, the face of a new era, where the next threat to national security might come, not from a foreign spy, but from a teenager with a dial-up connection and too much ambition. After his sentencing, Jonathan returned home to a new reality, one defined by silence. The same room that once glowed with computer screens now sat dark and empty. His machines were confiscated. His internet access was cut. For a young man whose world had always existed through circuits and code, it felt like exile. He enrolled in community college courses, tried to rebuild a normal life, but the label never left him. In every online discussion about hacking, C0Me raid became legend, both admired and condemned. To many in the cybersecurity world, he was proof that the system was vulnerable. To law enforcement, he was a warning. And to Jonathan, he was a ghost of his own making. In the years that followed, the US government began treating digital intrusions as acts of war. Jonathan's case was cited in FBI training programs, cybersecurity conferences, and federal reports on digital threat evolution. Laws tightened. Penalties increased. What had started as a teenage experiment became the foundation for the early 21st century's approach to cyber defense. But Jonathan himself struggled to escape his past. In 2007, a separate federal investigation into a massive retail data breach known as the TJX hack, which affected over 45 million credit cards, cast suspicion on several Florida-based hackers. Although Jonathan denied any involvement, federal agents raided his home again, seizing computers and documents. He felt betrayed, convinced that his name would forever carry guilt, even when innocent. In a note later found by his family, Jonathan wrote, "I honestly don't have faith in the justice system anymore. Maybe my story will help someone understand what it feels like to be destroyed by it." On the 18th of May 2008, Jonathan James took his own life. He was 24 years old. His death sent shockwaves through the cybersecurity community. Former investigators, hackers, and journalists all revisited his case, asking whether the punishment had fit the crime. Some argued he had become a scapegoat in an era when governments didn't yet understand the internet. Others saw a cautionary tale, a genius undone by his own curiosity. Today, Jonathan's story is taught in ethics and cybersecurity courses across the world, not as a tale of villainy, but of consequence. His actions forced NASA to rebuild its defenses, shaped juvenile cyber law, and reminded an entire generation that the line between exploration and violation can be a single keystroke. In the end, the boy who hacked NASA didn't just expose a system's weakness, he revealed humanity's fragile relationship with its own creation. We built the internet to connect the world. But Jonathan James showed us how easily a single mind could touch the sky and fall back to Earth.